What time is it? Okay, great. I'm 4 minutes late. I'm fine. Okay, let's get started here. So, I'm really sorry again on having to, at the last minute, shift the lab that was supposed to be yesterday. L'Oreal texted me at like 4 in the morning being like, I just woke up and I'm throwing up and I have a fever and I can't come. And I'm like, oh, I would totally have come and just done the lab to not get things off schedule. But like my daughter had a doctor's appointment at 8:30. And I'm like, it's too late to cancel. We're going to get fined if we do. And, anyway. So I was just like, I guess we'll be fine to postpone. We're also, I would say, well ahead of the game in terms of content. I don't know exactly why, but we're, you know, we're a little bit ahead of the pace. So, we're almost done interviewing, and you're not going to do that lab until like after reading week. So by then, all of the knowledge will have deeply sunk into you, and you'll have a really good handle on it. We're a little bit ahead. It was probably that online lecture. My online lectures are very, very efficient compared to my in-person lectures for some reason. Less jokes, my joke per minute rate in person is higher, I guess. They were also designed during COVID, where it was like, I need to get the information before I lose the class. So I was like, I'm going to hammer out 26-minute lectures that people can watch really quickly. So we're well ahead of the content, and we may adjust some in-class scheduling as well to kind of correspond to that. So I might cancel a class, I don't know, maybe before reading week, I'll get sick and can't come. I don't know. I'm sure you'd be heartbroken if the Friday before reading week, I was like, I think I have the consumption, I guess. I guess I better go see the doctor. What was the tuberculosis? I used to joke every time I'd get a cold, and I'd tell my wife, I think I have the consumption. I'm probably going to die. And she'd be like, you'll be fine. Okay. Weirdly, I found like a pack of Neocitrin in my pocket today. For some reason, I'm like, why do I have this? I don't know. Okay, so we're well ahead of the game. So we'll finish off doing, we'll talk about focus groups a little bit more today. And we'll kind of get set up there. Yeah, like we're so far ahead of the game. At this point, I might end a week early, which probably has bad implications. Or I'll really slow the pace down. We're just gonna, one slide is gonna take all class. No, I don't know. Anyway, so I do apologize for postponing the lab. It was somewhat unavoidable because a confluence of events sort of hit all at the same time. We'll do it next week. I might ask L'Oreal if she can combine 2 labs into one or something like that so that the schedule doesn't get too off its kilter, but you're still getting time. Along with that, the mini labs, I know I haven't put them up yet. It was part of my plan to do it today, and today has gone sideways in several ways. Just stare off into the darkness. No, this has been a really busy day. Lots of students coming in, and then big finance meetings, and just have not gotten as much done as I wanted to. I will put those up, but the mini lab for the lab that was supposed to be yesterday won't be due until next Sunday, right? So not this Sunday coming up, but the Sunday right before reading week, so like November 10th. Or I can make it due after reading week. You know what? I'm going to make it due after reading week. That's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to make it due after reading week. Because why have people do something when they probably just want to fly to Mexico or something? I don't know. Do your lab on the plane. That's what we're going to do. No, I'm going to make it due the after reading week. So the Sunday before we come back after reading week, that's going to be due. And then I think you're going to have a mini lab due every week after that until the end of the term. And I'm sorry about that. That's some super helpful planning on my part. But I can't control when TAs get sick. So all good. Okay, any questions? Sorry, this is my ramble. And like I said, my brain is not fully connecting anymore with my body. So there is the possibility at one point that I either just start speaking French or Russian. So if I start speaking a language you don't understand, It's just that my brain has stopped. I was trying to find a word, and I thought of the French word, and I thought of the Russian word, and I couldn't for the life of me think of the English word I was looking for. And I'm like, what is wrong with my brain today? I don't know. Okay, so just one of those days. I need reading week. I need it so bad. It must come now. I keep saying, and no one listens to me, that fall reading week is too late. It needs to be 1 to 2 weeks earlier than it is. But no one cares, and no one listens to me. So I just work here. Okay. Now that I've burned through 9 minutes of class. We were talking about focus groups last time, right? So we were talking about some of the wonderful things about focus groups. And then I guess we ended off on this slide where this is just a list of, pretty famous studies that have all used focus groups. And, we pointed out that there's a lot of variability, right? Number of groups, 8. Number of groups, don't know. Number of groups, 52. Man, good on you. You're the best. Number of groups, 4. This study did not go as well. Number of groups, 8. Each group had 2 sessions. So technically 4 focus groups, each group, or is that number of groups 8? So that's probably 16 sessions. So that's actually pretty good. Nobody knows. And 14, right? Same thing with the range of, the size of groups. Probably 12 is my favorite answer. We don't really know. They never told us. Anyway, so there's a ton of variability in terms of focus groups. There's no I think one way of doing it in particular. There's just a lot of different ways that these things work. Just double checking one thing. We're good. Okay. So, selecting participants. Recruiting participants for focus groups, like with interviews, is probably the hardest thing. It's made a little bit harder by the fact that you have to find a group of people that can all come at the same time, right? With interviews, the one advantage is you can recruit one person, start your interviews, do your interview with that one person, then recruit the next person, right? And you can stretch it out over a longer time frame. With focus groups, you have to recruit a bunch of people all at the same time. And it can be a little bit of a burden. Prior to COVID, I feel like social media was a really good way to recruit people, and I had some luck with it. After COVID, I feel like people went insane, and recruiting on social media now brings dark consequences or crazy people. But yeah, I had recruited for a couple of sets of focus groups, all on Facebook and Reddit, and I had great results. And I would not go near Reddit with a 1,000-foot pole now because it is full of crazy people. The merely crazy or the completely crazy. I don't know which ones are worse. Okay, one strategy for focus groups is what's called natural groups. And natural groups basically are people who already know each other, right? And have had some interaction. So if you're recruiting, right, for, I don't know, you want to find out about corporate culture and you want to do some corporate culture groups, right? You could recruit all within a single company, something like that, right? Or if you want to find out about biker gangs, you could go down to the local Hells Angels bar and try to recruit a bunch of Hells Angels for your focus group. Not recommended. I'm joking about that. Don't do that. You'll die. Although, again, my boss has a great relationship with the Hells Angels, apparently. Don't ask why. She interviews lots of them, and they seem to like her quite a bit. So they refer to them in a very chatty way. They're like, yeah, all the guys in HA. I'm like, what's HA? And they're like, oh, the Hells Angels. I'm like, okay. You undersold that with just calling them HA. Sounded like a social club or something. Anyway, so natural groups, right, depending on the goals of your research, can be really useful, and you can go to all one place and get people. And it's useful if, you're trying to find out how social interaction occurs within particular groups, or a really condensed sense of one particular group's reactions. Now, for the most, or their attitudes, opinions, or whatever, for the most part, natural groups are going to be really, you'd have to design your research study around a natural group for this basically to work. Most of the time, I don't think you get this lucky and you're talking to more diverse populations, but if you can do a natural group, obviously once you get past your gatekeeper, or if you haven't someone to introduce you, right, you can get access really easily. Okay, a couple of problems, right? Pre-existing styles of interaction or status hierarchies can affect discussions. So let's say you're in a company, you're doing corporate research of some kind, and you want to find out, people's attitudes on the management style, and you're doing focus groups. People might not want to tell you, right? They might not be honest because they're worried that their bosses might, the other employees sitting there might snitch them out to their bosses. So they're like, yeah, I really don't like the compliance reports we have to do. I think they're really dumb, right? They're overly long, and then, that's Sheila from accounting, and she's worried that Ted, also from accounting, is going to go to their mutual boss and say, she said this in the focus group, right? So people might not be completely honest when you have these natural groups. People tend to be more comfortable in some cases talking openly around strangers because you don't have any pre-existing social connections, hierarchies, and so you do feel like you can be a lot more open in some ways, right? It can be intimidating with strangers, but you're not worried about consequences of anything that you say. So pre-existing hierarchies, rivalries, worries that things are going to leave the group can all affect recruiting in natural groups. And yeah, sometimes, especially in really tight-knit cultures, right? So if you had, or groups, if you have, certain people with certain assumptions, they might have some taken for granted assumptions that no other people in the group are going to challenge. You might not know what they are, but they're all going to talk to each other in certain ways, right? Certainly if you're doing research on, if you were doing research on something like a corporate culture, they often have these sort of like taken for granted assumptions about the nature of their company or their work or whatever. I'm sure the Hells Angels also have their own things, but don't ask me what they are. I don't know. Although apparently my one boss told me, yeah, a lot of the guys who are at the top of HA look just like you. And I'm like, compliment? Like, well, no, they're clean cut. They're, a lot of them shave their heads. I'm like, this is not a choice. This was forced upon me. I'm sorry. Okay, so does that all make sense? Okay. All right, I want to say a couple of other things about selecting participants. A lot of it, is going to be convenience. Most focus groups, you're dealing with convenience samples, right? So again, remember with all qualitative, right? So when you go to do your major lab number 2, you're generally dealing with non-probability samples. I do not know what has happened here. Oh, occasionally, if I'm too close to the top, occasionally I drag something down. There we go. So, very quick tip for major lab number 2. When it says what kind of sampling are you going to do, if you come at me with simple random sampling, that's not going to get you a good mark because we don't really, you wouldn't be able to do simple random sampling in a qualitative study, right? For interviews or focus groups. And I only say this because people do this all the time. And they're like, oh, sampling. I remember we did that before the midterm. Let me go back and I will do multi-stage cluster sampling. And I'm like, no, that's wrong. So don't do that. And because you're in class, you will hopefully remember this because I warned you. Generally speaking, you're doing a couple of kinds, snowball or convenience. I would say generally speaking, you're not doing quota sampling because you're not trying to get a certain percentage, right? You're essentially kind of stuck with most qualitative studies on getting whoever chooses to talk to you, right? You're not really able to select it at a very high level, and that's fine. So you're doing convenience sampling. You're going to do recruitment in all sorts of crazy, fun, and interesting ways. So I just had one. It was actually funny. They were trying to recruit professors for a study, for a focus group they're doing on role stress and time pressure on professors. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you to be part of your focus group because I actually just don't have time to be part of their focus group. But they were just emailing professors at the university to, find out about time pressures and all of this stuff. And they're like, it starts by having you watch a 1-hour movie. I'm like, I'm sorry, you want me to watch a 1-hour movie and do a focus group? No, I really don't have time for that. But right, you're just gonna send it out, and like I said, Facebook is a typical way. Again, if you have prominent community members or if strangers, Facebook, these two are not related. If you can infiltrate Facebook groups, that's useful, and then put out invitations. Weirdly though, I infiltrated some for this study I did on like Catholics in Edmonton, and to this day, somehow I cannot get them out of my Facebook Messenger. They will remain there forever. So I'm still part of these chat groups, and I'm like part of this very Filipino, incredibly devoutly Catholic kind of Facebook Messenger group that I just have to keep muting over and over again because occasionally it just like pops up and takes over my life. So we all have our problems. That's one of mine. Okay, social media. All right, convenience sampling now that wasn't a language at all. Convenience sampling through social media is becoming increasingly common, and yeah, you just have to find participants wherever you can get them. Pre-screening becomes, like, especially with social media, pre-screening becomes really, really important to weed out the crazy people, or the people who potentially would want to derail your thing. I know this happened to one of our grad students doing environmental research, right, or environmental sociology, and trying to get like honest to God opinions about climate change deniers and climate change denial groups. And there have been people that have tried to get into her study to just derail it and yell at her. So you do have to pre-screen a little bit to try and avoid some of that stuff. Okay. So, asking questions in a focus group. Yeah, so because a focus group, right, you have more voices, right? You have a lot more people, you're talking, let's say between 6 and 12. We're gonna hope between 6 and 12 in your focus group. You generally have your focus group schedule, not the days that you're going to do it, but the questions you're going to ask, right? Or your focus group guide is going to be quite a bit shorter because you want to make sure that you can listen to the discussion that people are having. So, you're not going to do 15 to 20 questions. I would say probably 6 to 10 kind of general topics that you want to talk about for like a 2-hour focus. Well, let's say 3 hours. 2 to 3 hours. We'll say 2 to 3 hours. So, because, to get through 6 to 12 people's opinions on any number of things and make sure anyone has been heard, also give a bathroom break in the middle, is going to take a little bit of time. Some things to say. All right, I will say, yeah, the amount of intervention taken on by the moderator, it's a fun job. Actually, I really like moderating focus groups. If I could say, like, one of my favorite things to do in research is actually moderating focus groups because they're really fun to be a part of a lot of the time. But generally, things that you have to think about is, in terms of interventions, the topic under discussion, how much knowledge the participants have, how much you need to get through, and how off topic, if there's certain personalities dominating the whole conversation, you might have to intervene some more. You might have to intervene more, right? And because you don't want to let one person take over the whole group and rant on for your whole time and get nobody else's opinions, or everybody feels intimidated, right? So amount of intervention, you want it to be, I guess a golden rule would be as little as possible. Because you want to let people talk as much as possible, but there is going to be moments you have to step in. What's my next? I want to say one other thing, and maybe I don't have a slide for this, so I'm gonna see if I can very quickly add one in. All right, we're live editing. This always goes super well. Okay. Blank slide. And we're back. Okay. So very simple things. Like if you ever do a focus group, I'm gonna get right down to like very practical things. And if you ever do a focus group, you will thank me. Okay. You can't always control this, but this is a table. These are two kinds of tables. Round tables are better than square or rectangular tables. And if you are the moderator, you should never sit here or here. You should be sitting like here, one of these middle seats. Why? Well, I think it's obvious, right? Well, the second you have your moderator sitting up here at the head of a table, all of the conversation goes straight at the moderator. Because it's weird. We're actually really attuned to power dynamics, and you sitting at the head of a table means you're in charge. And so then everybody is going to talk to you, right? As opposed to if you're sitting here, people are kind of looking at each other. They're not all looking at you. Now, you can still do it, right? If you have a rectangular table, just don't sit on the ends. Otherwise, everyone's going to talk to you. Round tables are way better because they're more egalitarian, and it doesn't assume a power dynamic, and people can look at each other and talk to each other, and they're not turning their chairs and craning their necks always to look at you. So, very simple tip, right? If you can make sure that you have a round table, but if you have a rectangular table, don't sit at the ends. Because inevitably what happens is it becomes you interviewing 11 people in sequence because they're all just talking to you. They're not talking to each other. And you do want them kind of talking to each other a little bit, or at least listening to each other and riffing on what people are saying. And it's much easier to be non-interventionist, and I only say this from experience, right? If you're in this scenario, than in this one, right? This is going to be much harder. I will make this is a green check mark. Ta-da! And this is an angry orange X. Okay. My doodles are awesome. I love them. And no one can tell me otherwise. So, limitations of focus groups. You have less control over the discussion than an interview, right? And there's certainly more voices. It becomes a lot more difficult to kind of channel things and manage things in a particularly concerted way. And I mean, I would say like that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? So have it under limitations. It's more organic. In some senses, you're going to have less reactivity to some extent because people are going to be a little bit more naturalistic in a group environment than when you're sitting and interviewing them, right? So there's less of that. But that's it. Yeah, you do have less control. And I would say, I don't know if I have depth. There's less depth, right? On any particular subject, there's going to be less depth than there would be in an interview. Because if an interview, you can really dig into someone's, answers and personal life and all of that fun stuff. In a focus group, right, there's a lot of people there. You want to make sure every voice is heard. It's a different kind of focus. So, yeah, it's a little bit different. Okay. New color. An unwieldy amount of data, it can be a little bit more difficult to tease out. I guess like when you talk about an interview, right, you get a lot of in-depth data with each particular subject, right? So each person that you interview, you get a lot of data on that one person. I would say in terms of being unwieldy, it's less the amount in focus groups a lot of the time than keeping straight where it came from and what it means, right? Because you're going to have different people chiming in. By the way, transcribing focus groups is a complete nightmare because you have a bunch of voices in the room, and usually you don't have, sometimes you could do video. People are a little bit more reluctant, but if you have audio recording only, it's going to be like you have to, as the moderator, other pro tip, make sure that if you're the one kind of prompting people to talk, you always address them by name, right? So it's like, Marie, now it's your turn to speak, right? Marie, what do you have to say about that? So that when the person transcribing it or you transcribing it, you know who was spoken to. And sometimes I've done things like, if there's an exchange between two people, when it's done, I'm going to be like, that was an exchange between Joe and Tammy, right? So that my transcriber can then be like, oh, I can label then Joe and Tammy. You always have, I'm giving you like really, this is probably like way more detail than you need. When I've done focus groups, I always have people identify themselves at the beginning, right? And give a little bit of like a little introduction. Hi, my name is Tammy. I am a school teacher from Arkansas or whatever. And part of that is so that my transcriber can get to know their names and voices, right? And then can kind of reference that back. So yeah, always, they can get unwieldy to transcribe. They're a pain in the butt, especially if you get crosstalk and two people talking at once, which happens. People don't always want to take their turn, and you can be like, this is the baton of speech. You will only speak when you have the baton. You don't want to be quite that in control. But, like I said, I always would be like, oh, Joe, you look like you have something to say. And then the transcriber knows that it was Joe speaking, right? But it can get really unwieldy. Crosstalk, this is what professional transcribers that are lazy will often just like, instead of transcribing what was said, they'll just write crosstalk. And then you have to go back and listen to it yourself. That looks like gross talk or sross talk. Sorry, that's a C, crosstalk. So you do have to sometimes identify, and again, that's why sometimes I'll say for the transcript basically, oh, that was Joe and Marina speaking or whatever. But Marina's not here today. I wonder where she is. Okay. The data can be difficult to analyze. I've never, for some people, I've heard that people find them harder to analyze because you don't have as much depth and you don't always know the context of why people are saying things. I've never found that focus group data is that hard to analyze, but you never know. Other people have different experiences. Maybe I just got lucky. Purple now. Personality traits in the room. Dominant and quiet, right? You do have to be attentive. You are going to have some personalities that take over the room. And like I said, you actually want that because you don't want a room full of quiet people. You want someone that's going to drive at least the initial stages of your discussion, preferably 2 or 3 of them. But you have to then make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak as well. And yeah, focus groups might not be your best choice. Oh, I'm having fun with colors now. They might not be your best choice when you have difficult, sensitive issues, strong social hierarchies, or really strongly opposed positions. So I had these, they're not friends, I would call them acquaintances, and they decided to do these focus groups. They were on basically talking to people who had been involved in kind of sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic clerics. And they did focus groups. And I remember talking to them and I was like, do you think focus groups are the best idea for this? Because I'm like, you're talking about pretty sensitive issues. You might have some problems in focus groups. And as it turned out, right, like they were going to do like 10 focus groups. They did 2, and then those 2 focus groups kind of melted down on them, where people got really, some people got really defensive, some people got really oppositional, lots of people were crying, and it didn't work particularly well. And I didn't say I told you so, but I thought I told you so. So, difficult, sensitive topics, yeah, generally speaking, I would advise against focus groups. I would want to do interviews when it comes to those issues. It gives people a little bit more space, and especially if something's embarrassing, you might not get the best quality data out of a focus group. And yeah, you can have things really melt down on you. They were going to retool, and then COVID hit, and then the whole project fell apart, and nothing ever came of it, which is probably for the best, to be honest. Not because the topic isn't important, because they didn't know what they were doing. They had not taken my intro to social methods, where I offer stunning insights into how to do research. They're all older than me, so why would they take my class? Only because something. Keep thoughts to self. This goes on the internet. Okay. Online interviews and focus groups. Yeah, I love online interviews. I've never done an online focus group, but I can imagine this devolving into chaos. Okay, so advantages, obviously. So ease, right? One of the biggest problems, especially with a focus group, is getting people to you. I mean, like, online interviews are great. I'll tell you, like, when I was doing my interviews on my dissertation, I interviewed people in Moscow, Kazan, Thailand, the UK, a bunch of places in the UK, LA. Where else did? Well, I guess Culver City, which is near LA. Right? There was a couple other ones. I can't remember. I think I did one for someone who's in St. Petersburg as well. I'd have to look it up. I'm trying to. Oh, New York. There's one guy's in Mike. Mike was in New York. He was my favorite. He gave me the best quotes. He was very funny. He told the best stories, and he was very unguarded. It was wonderful. Mike Montgomery, you are still my favorite. Now, I did all of this for the grand price of $0 because I did them from my basement in my house. So online, and like, it was convenient for them. The guy in Thailand was a bit of a challenge. I ended up doing that interview at 2 a.m. here, and it was like, middle of the afternoon there. So I got up at 2 a.m. to do this interview, and I remember being so scared that I was going to sleep through it and miss it. So that's the only stress if you're doing these dispersed interviews. But they are great because they allow people to do their interviews from wherever they are, right? And wherever you are, and it costs you nothing. And increasingly, like, Zoom has recording software built into it, so you can record interviews really easily. So they are really wonderful, I think, especially for interviews, right? Because they allow, there's a couple of things, right? Even if you're talking, say, sensitive topics, if someone's in their own home, they're going to be a lot more comfortable than meeting in a cafe or a library. All of the kind of questions about, like, weird stuff that could happen when you meet someone in person goes away if you're meeting online or on the phone, right? So they have a lot to recommend them. Focus groups. Focus groups are a little bit different. And the biggest problem with focus groups is that would be done online is focus, not groups. You can imagine, right? Like, someone is at their house. I mean, you all did COVID school, right? So it's like, okay, I turned off my camera, and I threw my microphone on the floor. It was awesome. It didn't cost $60 or anything. And then you're like, oh, yeah, absolutely, wonderful. Yes, I'm so engaged in your focus group, right? Or, you're playing Monopoly online while you're supposed to be doing this focus group. So a couple, obviously things that are a problem. Usually you use smaller focus groups, and you can definitely get people, who are geographically distributed, and there's less visual distractions, less active response to the moderator, but also, people are distracted, they're unfocused, they may not be paying attention. There's no way for you to really know, even as the moderator, what people are doing. They can turn their cameras off, they can not really be listening. There's a lot more distractions at home. So I imagine they're really tough to do. Like I said, I've never done an online focus group. It would be easier than getting people to one particular space, but I suspect they wouldn't work as well. And especially after COVID, I feel like people have these like, I don't know, whenever I'm in online meetings, I'm doing 17 things, right? I'm like answering emails and half listening and prepping for class and all sorts of stuff. So, they might be easy, but I feel like they would be hard. And, while you might have less visual bias, I think it's probably, harder to read people as well and harder to read reactions. Again, recording audio is going to be way simpler than it would be, in person, but I feel like there's as many disadvantages. Okay. Oh, how are we doing? Not too bad. Okay. Right. So disadvantages, to online focus groups. Would they take longer? Maybe not necessarily, right? They might actually be more efficient. Less people can just like get up and go to the bathroom, and you're probably not serving people food and drinks, so that's easier. I do think this, difficulty in establishing rapport, it would be much harder to do with online, right? I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty good at establishing rapport with people, and it's always been something I do pretty easily in focus groups. But yeah, I don't know how you would do that online, and especially if people start turning off their cameras. I have whole classes that I feel like I never saw them and I don't know anything about them, and they're like, "Wow, you were such a good professor." I'm like, "Who are you?" Right? Because they were on the screen, right? So hard to establish rapport. More difficulty in probing, and especially something like this, right? Because there's moments in a focus group where you're like, Tom says something, and you can see the look on, let's say, Sheila's face, and she's just like, and you're like, Sheila, it looks like you have something to say. And then she'll, let loose on Tom and his garbage opinion or whatever. That's a lot harder to do, right? When everybody's a little box, or with Zoom where the speaker view pops up, and even keeping an eye on people's faces and body language gets a lot harder on Zoom, right? I think it's easier for people not to respond, right? To just kind of sit there. Yeah, you cannot identify distracted participants, especially if the camera is off, right? You cannot tell who's paying attention or not. And then, yeah, who of us, I was just in a Zoom meeting today where someone, the key person, disappeared because their home Wi-Fi crapped out on them. And then they're like on their phone and they're like, "Can you hear me now? Is this working?" Like, "I can see up your nose. What are you doing?" Right? So that's always a problem too, right? The internet is wonderful, but it can be unreliable. So you can lose people and then you might not be able to get them back. Or you might have to, your second degree might have to be in tech support, which, by the way, is super annoying. Like trying to tech support people. Have you tried turning it on and off? Right? Attempt to reset your computer. Whatever. Just, I quit. Goodbye. Yeah, and obviously, if people have tech problems, they're going to get frustrated and potentially quit, and so that can be a problem. Or you have to keep reminding people to turn their microphone on. "I can't hear you. Turn on your microphone." Or all this stuff. You've all been in Zoom meetings. They're super fun. Okay. All right. 7 minutes. Some of these comparisons are kind of interesting. You know what? I'm gonna say, all right, why don't I just do these? I remember putting these in when I designed this course. Okay, why would you do one of these? So we've talked about, right, ethnography. We've talked about interviews and focus groups. What are the kind of relative strengths and advantages of each of them, right? And because these are your two big methods, right? When we talk about qualitative methods, ethnography and interviews are your two big groups of methods, right? So your participant observations with interviews, and then your just straight interviews or focus groups. These are probably, chances are we're going to talk about some other methods, and especially about things like content analysis. But chances are, most of you who go do sociology are going to be doing some combination of these things. So why would you choose one over the other? Okay, so ethnography. Definitely better for seeing through other people's eyes, right? And like learning the on the ground way things work, right? The taken for granted. Oh, there's a furry joke in that next one somewhere. I don't know. Because you're there and you're experiencing things with people. They're not telling you about it. You're seeing, you're seeing the thing as it's happening. You're experiencing it with people. And so you can give your own descriptions, right? As long as you're taking good field notes. Always remember the field notes. Okay. So that, they're good for that. Better for uncovering hidden and deviant activities, right? Because, we have our little thing called social desirability bias. If you ask someone in an interview about deviant or hidden activities, there's a pretty strong chance they're going to feel embarrassed and not want to tell you about it. I say that, and yet, people always surprise me with their level of openness about these things. But let's say, you wanted to know about the sexual habits of our friends, the furries, who've been my constant whipping boy through this course, right? It might be better to go and, hang out amongst the furries rather than be like, so you're a furry, tell me about your weird and deviant sexual behaviors. I'm not sure that they have any, but it's possible, right? Subcultures always have something deviant or hidden, right? If you experience that for yourself or see people engaging in things, it's going to be much easier to kind of figure out where those boundaries are than being like, tell me about all those things you don't want anyone to know about. That clock is always behind. Yeah, I mean, you get better context, right, for people's behavior. You can see more things, and it's more naturalistic, right? Especially, even like both in kind of covert and overt settings, right? You are seeing people in their own environments rather than an interview where they're telling you what happens in their environment. Okay, how are we doing? So, I just spilled coffee all over myself. I'm good at drinking. Advantages of interviews, obviously, over ethnography. Some things you're not going to be able to observe. You just need people to tell you about, right? If you want to talk to people about what life is like in prison, chances are you're not going to be able to go to prison in any real way, nor would you particularly want to. You need to you need people to tell you, right? Frequency of criminal behavior, drug use, frequency of drug use behavior, right? There's a lot of stuff that you could never ever find out through ethnography, right? It just wouldn't be possible. Ethnography is very present focused, right? Where you're observing things in real time, especially the participant observation part. Interviews, right? You can ask people, you can go back to their childhood, you can find out kind of some of the context, which is why a lot of people include interviews in ethnography, so you can do that. I give up. This pen is much better than my other one, and yet challenges remain. Right? Because if you have interviews in ethnography, you can do the same thing, which is why we would rarely get a straight participant observation kind of ethnography with no interviews or focus groups or anything. You get less kind of on the ground data, but interviews are so much less intrusive, right? You're not there. There's less chance of reactivity, especially if you're in that overt role as an ethnographer. Longitudinal research is a lot easier and cheaper, right? You could interview a person at time 1, and then at time 2, and then at time 3. Whereas you being, let's say this is today, this is 2 years from now, and this is 5 years from now. There's no way you're going to be able to be in the field, right? You couldn't do an ethnography that's 5 years long. You can't do that. Ethnography, I can spell. You can't do that long. So interviews, right? You could come back and you could re-interview people over and over again, right? Over the course of time, find out how things have changed, have them fill you in on the details, right, of their lives. And again, this is like years, but you could do this over months or weeks, or much more easily than you can do an ethnography, right? Because you're having to be in the field for an ethnography for a very long time. Yeah, you can greater breadth of topics that can be covered, and you can address specific issues that you might not see in ethnographic observations, right? Especially if people are being a little bit guarded because you're there. Okay, I'm done. That is my it, and I have 1 minute left, but I don't want to talk anymore. And you don't want me to talk anymore because it's Friday and you just want to leave. And that's fine. Okay, so we will pick up on a new topic on Monday. That is the day after the weekend. We'll come back next week. You'll have a lab. Even if I have to teach it myself, I will make sure that happens. So if L'Oreal hasn't recovered, I will be here to teach it. It'll be great. And we'll keep going from there. And yes, first mini lab, or the fourth mini lab, will be due after reading week. So we'll finish off the labs and we'll get going. Okay, have a great weekend. We will see you then. I will continue talking. Hello. My name is Enigma Montoya. You killed my mother. Prepare to die. You as